Everyone worships something. But is that true? And why do so many believers love to say it? What goal do they think they're accomplishing when they say it? What point could they possibly be making in favor of their God by making this assertion? Don't they see the potential harm that can come from labeling everything in such a way? Don't they see the unfairness in the comparison? It's questions like this and many more that I want to address in today's episode, episode 7 of When Christians Respond, where we take a look at really common Christian quips and rebuttals and retorts, and we examine them much more closely. So to start, I thought it might be nice to try to steelman what the believer or Christian is trying to accomplish here. I think that there is even this secular or sociological, psychological aspect of believing that everyone has this immense need for meaning, which is not the same as worship. Sorry, I'm trying to steelman. Stay with it, Brandon. And that when people read things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs or Viktor Frankl's thoughts on meaning and things of this nature, they say, hey, look, within all of us, it's inbuilt. We have this desire for deference or reverence or ritual or routine. Don't you see? That could only be if there's this objective source drawing us towards it. That's worship. It's understanding our place in the grand cosmos and giving credit where credit is due. And people that are unbelievers, they're simply just mistaken. They're taking that inbuilt necessity for worship and they're creating false idols. They're putting it towards the Super Bowl. They're putting it towards their favorite hobby. They're putting it towards maybe even something beneficial like their family, but it's a mismatch. That desire is God pulling on you. That worship that you give only goes towards the only thing that is worthy of worship. And that's the entity or being that created everything, including you. I think that's the idea. And I get it to a certain degree, and I definitely got it when I was still a believer. As someone that really believed what God said about loving Him first being the greatest commandment, about the hierarchy of values, forget Maslow, let's talk about what God says the correct hierarchy is. It is Him and His kingdom first. And despite how skeptical and serious I may come across on the channel, I've got a real loving, poet, open, creative heart that loves to see the connections in everything and admire and be in awe of something larger than myself. And as a Christian, bam, easy, straight to God. Worship made perfect sense. Let me lower myself to raise Him higher, where He belongs, where He is. It is an acceptance, a recognition. And so first, I just want to say, I get it. But second, I want to say, as someone who has left the faith and has had many years now not worshiping anything, this claim that everyone worships something is simply false. And what it really boils down to is the logical fallacy of a false equivalence. And so maybe we'll add it to this playlist as well. This fallacy occurs when two different terms, in this case, worship, and we'll just say something like secular dedication or admiration, are equated without acknowledging the profound differences and the nuances. I'm not saying I don't understand why this got switched around, but it's unfair. Thus why I want to examine it further. And let me back up. Where's this coming from? Well, first of all, I get it in the comments all the time, and I see it in videos everywhere like these.
Worship is ingrained in humanity. It's what we do as people. We were created to worship God. And if we don't worship God, we're going to worship something else. It might look a bit different for everyone, but we're all worshiping something.
I don't care if you call yourself an atheist. I don't care if you call yourself a person of faith. I don't care who you're following. You were created to worship. Everybody worship.
If you say, oh, I don't worship other gods, let me ask you this question. What thing, if it were taken from you, your life will crumble? If it is not God, then that thing is an idol.
What we try and show to people is that their default position is to worship something. Man cannot not worship.
We're all worshiping something. That's some basics of worship.
Everyone worships.
Everyone is born hardwired to worship something.
Everybody worships. They worship something or someone.
You are always worshipping something.
The truth is that we all actually worship something.
All humans are meant to worship, and this is true.
Hopefully I don't have to convince you that this is something many believers say. I don't think I've ever been a part of a church or a small group or a weekend of worship services or anything like that where I have not seen this alluded to. And sometimes it is just to refocus the believer, and sometimes I think it is to chastise the non-believer or explain to them the mess up that they're having, the false idol that they're worshiping, and why that worship actually belongs to God the Father. Either way, there's harm done all along the way, and I want to start by examining the definitions. Again, going back to this false equivalence, then let's make sure we understand what we're confusing. So I want to talk about what is worship. What do Christians or believers mean by worship? And let's just use the Bible. We don't need to come up with definitions that we can then abuse and misuse to make these unfair comparisons. Let's see what God says about worship. The first place that it's really tied in is right off the bat in the Torah, in the teaching, especially when we look at the commandments of God. And so in places like Exodus 20:3-5, we have, "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." It is God who demands worship, and anything, even though this is specifically referencing literally other gods, that gets worship besides him or in his place then becomes a false idol, because he is the only one worthy of worship. So everything else falls short. That's why in some of those videos that you saw, it was around the context of you've built for yourself these other idols. A few books later, he says, "Fear the Lord your God, serve him only, and take your oaths in his name. Do not follow other gods." So connecting that back to our verse in Exodus, I want to point out that this aspect of fear, which in the best way you could translate to awe or reverence, is part of the act of worship, because it is specifically contrasted with what we're not supposed to do with those false idols. But we get even more explanation when we get to the Psalms. Example would be Psalm 95:6. "Come, let us bow down and worship. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker." Here we see worship as an act of humility, an act of submission, involving both physical and spiritual expressions of this worship. Really hitting on the physical with the kneeling and the bowing, but that spiritual we see all the way tied into the New Testament in verses like John 4:24. "God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and in truth." So here we're seeing a trueness of worship. What is sincere or real worship? Well, if God is a spirit, it is to worship him in spirit, something that transcends the physical. This is more than just some ritual. This is a heart matter, a spirit matter. Going back to what I said about awe, we see that in Revelation 14:7. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." So again, because of his power, because you should be fearing what he can do when judgment comes, this is why we worship. Now, worship can take all different kinds of forms. We see it through the Old and the New Testament. Sometimes it's acts of service. Sometimes it is joyfully making sound or utilizing instruments. Sometimes it is just that idea we have of bowing down before the feet of something greater than us, the very old ancient world idea of it. And where God is King of Kings, if you're going to bow to your king, how much greater than to bow towards God? But New Testament wise, I think the clearest description of worship we have, and the most problematic, is this. Romans 12:1. "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." So, New Testament, not getting it confused with some of these old laws and old commandments that may or may not have changed with the coming of Jesus. This is after Jesus' death and resurrection. We have a new ability to connect to the Creator God himself through the Son, Jesus Christ. And the true and proper, pretty important words, worship, is to live with our bodies as a living sacrifice. Now, some people stop there. They don't really think about what that means. But what are our references for what sacrifice is and the nature of it in the Bible? In the Old Testament, we have the sacrifice, which is always killing. It's taking life. It's blood magic to make atonement for sins. And it's ritualistic to the highest degree. Go see all the things that make someone clean or unclean and what had to be done and what kind of animal to use and when and what you would do with this or that part of it, etc. It is ritualistic. Even in terms of how it affects God, it is the scent of burning flesh that he loves. He mentions that 42 times in reference to sacrifice. It's pleasing to him, pleasing enough for him to forgive or allow atonement for. We get to the New Testament, and do things change? Does God become less barbaric? Do we move away from this pagan blood ritual magic cult stuff? No, not at all. We double down on it to an even more sickening degree, and we bring in human sacrifice or deity sacrifice. And God kills his only son for us, that by his blood we are forgiven. All the same things are there. Jesus is a sacrifice for us, and our true act of worship back to him is to be as living sacrifices. Meaning what? Meaning total worship, meaning total submission, total subjugation, the slave mentality that we've talked about so much on this channel, the denying of ourself, the hating of ourself, the willingness to put ourselves and anyone else, including husband and wife, parent and child, below this God to serve this God. And as a Christian, I know that that can be a beautiful thought. When you get outside of that and you see that system for what it is, at least to me, it becomes the opposite. It becomes quite literally one of the most disgusting ideas I can think of. We've been bought with a price. That price was Jesus' spilt blood, and that means we are now owned. And under the ownership of the Lord, we are commanded to love him, commanded to worship him, and expected to show that love and that worship by way of self-sacrifice. That's what worship is. So, with that definition of worship, I think carefully and accurately built out from Scripture, let's look at how the believers try to say, everyone has the desire to worship. Everyone worships something. Oh, look, you got together and painted your faces and wore the same color and wore jerseys, special ritualistic wear to gather around a tube and watch that game and raise your hands and scream and shout. Look, you worship also. No, even for the people that participate in this event in that kind of way, what do they do when it's over? They move on with their life. Yeah, they talk about the game the next day at work. And then what? Nothing for like another year for the most part. They move on. They have families. They still go to their job, or they still work on their hobbies or their passions or their side business. They still take fishing trips and long drives, scroll on their phone too much, and do all kinds of things besides worship. There's not a total life surrender, a sacrifice. Oh no, Brandon, they do sacrifice. Think about it. They sacrifice their time when they watch it. They sacrifice their money when they buy tickets or pay-per-view. They sacrifice their families when they choose to get together with their friends instead. How disingenuous. And I'm not strawmanning. I've heard all of that many times. That is a very common kind of thing, to exaggerate the things we do with our time, the things we're interested in, the things we're even maybe dedicated to, or things that we even love as, well, see, you're giving your body towards it, you're giving your time, your attention, your energy towards it. But those things are not acts of worship in the same way as what we just covered. Where is the supernatural element? Where is the reverence? Where is the sacrifice? Dedication might have significant investment, deep admiration towards. Do you not see the delta between that kind of thing, that deep admiration, and total submission and subjugation? There's so much room here, but you create the false equivalence and you put them together and they do not belong together. A key difference here, a good term to think about here, would be compartmentalization. Like I covered with the Super Bowl, it's over. And yeah, even if you like sports and you follow football that's still only on for a season, we're able to compartmentalize the things that we like and enjoy and still move on. And by the way, people that can't do that, they're typically labeled with a problem. How funny is this? That's where we get words like obsession or compulsion. People whose interest or loves take over their life to such a degree that they ruin relationship with others, that they can't hold down the job they're doing, that they can no longer find enjoyment in other things. You know what? That sounds a lot like some believers who go too far. But are they going too far, or are they living out the actual definition of worship? It's not seen as something bad then, but most of the time within the secular side of society, we understand that going too far in any of these things would actually start to look like worship, would be labeled negatively. And we would most of the time, I don't want to overgeneralize here, try to have people seek help for that, whether it's counseling or medication or whatever it is, to restore some balance, because nothing should take over one's life like that if it becomes unhealthy to their well-being. All I see here is a case being made that actual worship of something can be detrimental to the self, which, again, see my video on slave mentality. So for most people that have a lot of things they like and things that they might even love and things that they do more often than other things that other people might do, or anything like this that gets pointed out in these sermons or these videos about people's false idols, it simply falls so very flat. Admiration is not worship. Dedication is not worship. Love is not even worship. And that's as close as I think you can really get You know, I love my family. I have a hierarchy and they come first. And I think everyone has a hierarchy. And even people who haven't sat down to think about their hierarchy of values, sure, I can get on board with the Christian definition of, look, wherever you put most of your time, the thing you're unwilling to give up the most, that, let's go with, can be your highest value, but I do not agree that that is the thing you worship. Again, the false equivalence. It is just an unfair term that you are mapping onto that highest value. And this is the kind of wordplay that Christians love to do. Oh, you do believe in God, because we define God as the thing that caused all things. And if you believe that something didn't come from nothing, then something was caused by something, and therefore you believe in God. Gotcha. What's the point of these kinds of word games? No, I don't believe in God in the way that the term is generally used. A creator being with will, typically with triomny properties that created us with a purpose. No, I don't believe in that. In the same way that I don't believe I worship my family just because I love them deeply and have placed them as my highest value. You don't get to define these words for me, especially when they mean so very different than what your own Bible depicts them as. In the way that God demands to be worshipped, I worship nothing. And hey, maybe it's not even a conversation worth having. I don't know. I just see a lot of harm that can come from this kind of thinking. If we want to use two different words to define the same thing here, if you want to call my greatest love and highest value worship, if you want to use that word to describe those things, then sure, I worship. But again, that's not what worship means. And so it's just unfair and worse, unnecessary. And you're not doing it to find a replacement word. Most of the time when believers are saying this kind of a thing, it's because they're trying to make a point. And the point is that we are all wrong and they are right. That the reason we can love so deeply and the reason that we can feel such high emotions like awe is because they were given to us by God to be used back towards God, and any improper use of it is the false idol. This is where we err. This is where we sin. This is where we displease God. And all this is to me is just once again religion hijacking what is natural and normal and claiming it for itself. They do this with morality. They do this with meaning. Now they're doing it with worship. See, to a point, we agree that there is this natural thing within humans to be able to feel so strongly, to be able to be in such awe, to cry from the sheer beauty of something. I'm with you. It is some of the best parts of being human, but it is being human. It is not divine. It is not supernatural. No God required. These capabilities of people to feel this way and act this way and have ritual and routine and do these things that we know psychologically really do impact us, really do please us, really can contribute to the meaning of our life and how we navigate the space, etc. I'm on board with all of that. I'm not denying any of it, but it all existed long before the first words about Yahweh were ever even considered to be uttered. And it will still exist long after this religion has burnt out if human existence lasts long enough. These organic feelings that we are capable of having that are part of what it means to be human, they belong to us, not religion. They came about through evolutionary purposes. And there's many hypothetical circumstances I could give to explain this to you, but from a naturalistic perspective, an evolutionary perspective, when we look at the beginnings of religious phenomenon, of ritual acts as far back as we can see, and we try to explain that. So again, I'm just giving a hypothetical here. Here's what it could have looked like for someone or some tribe at some point in the past. As they're figuring out agriculture, as they're figuring out that when you put things in the ground, if the right conditions happen, you can get an end desired result. So you bow down, you get on your hands and knees with the earth, and you put the seed into the soil. You cover it up, you're tender, you're careful, and you've put it in a special place, a place where it's going to be able to get sun and receive rain. You've put in your hard work. You've taken time and energy and care and dedication to this act that is not yielding anything right now. And then you wait. And for doing these things in the correct order, in the right way, you're rewarded. Life comes forth. The crops come in, and you don't starve to death. You get nourishment. And it wasn't just you. It took these other huge things you cannot comprehend. It took the sun, an energy source, 93 million miles away. It took water falling from the sky as if a gift. It took the richness of the soil and the understanding of how to cultivate that. And when all those things happen just right, life, sustenance, potential, tomorrow. I can see the reverence that might go into something like that. I can see the carefulness of crafting the ritual so that you can teach it to another as this thing is new and we don't have the science yet to understand it or explain it. I can see the superstition that comes into play. It's not getting enough rain. I've noticed that when it doesn't get enough rain, this ritual doesn't work. What if I do something to try to make it rain? Maybe you do a dance. Maybe you cut yourself. Maybe you say some sacred words. Sometimes it works. And then our confirmation bias kicks in and we say, look, when I cut myself, when I did the dance, when I said the special words, the rain came. And then we start doing those things every time as an act of devotion, believing that something out there, something supernatural, needs something from us to perform its actions. And we imbue it into our culture, into our stories, into our family. This is how you do it. If you do all these things just right, you'll get the blessing. If you don't see this being acted out in the Old Testament with the rituals that they would do before they'd go into war, the incantations that they would say, the blood magic that would be used, you just simply have not read your Bible then. This is the story for all religion. And whether this exact example ever happened or not is beside the point. This is how you get concepts like prayer when you say the sacred words, and worship when you bow down, and sacrifice when you sweat and you bleed and you cut your hands as you do it. And it goes into the earth and it produces something that will sustain you. These are our evolutionary beginnings of the intangible parts of our world that we then labeled religious, spiritual, superstitious, etc. So yes, that stuff is baked into us. It is hardwired to such a degree. And in a modern age, when we understand now the science of why rain falls and climate and temperature and how the sun affects photosynthesis and what kind of chemicals in the dirt that we cultivate actually react in ways to help something grow. When we understand all of that, it still doesn't take away from the awe at the end of the day. In the same way that just because I understand what's happening in my brain on a neurochemical level now, the endorphins and oxytocin and things like this that are released during a long hug with my children, it doesn't mean I say to myself, oh, well, this is all just natural. It doesn't mean anything. No, I still revel. I still am moved by it. I still long for it. I still desire it. I still try to create it. So I don't say any of this to take away from the beauty of love or being dedicated to something, or the power of ritual. I get it. I endorse it. I want more of it. I think it's something that as a skeptic or someone who leaves religion, you can throw that baby out with the bathwater. But I just as easily see the harm in attaching it to things that aren't there and using it as a way to polarize and criticize and judge those who don't agree with you. And that's exactly what believers are doing when they talk to non-believers in such a fashion. And so that's it. That's really my whole thing for today. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. We covered a lot more ground that I wasn't planning to cover exactly, but hopefully you find this kind of thing very interesting. This whole divide between religion and what is natural, secular, normal, whatever you want to call it, is not as black and white as people like to make it. And when you fight against something that is very much on one side of it, like, oh, this is worship, all people worship, to take that down, I don't want to lose what's in between. I don't want to become so materialistic that I'm on this other side of, oh, it's not worship because none of these things have great value. No, all these things have great value. All these things are real. But to go so far as to say it's worship in the biblical sense that it's worship, that's incorrect. And that biblical act of worship, that's harmful. And not only is it harmful, but it's futile because that God doesn't exist. And it begs other questions that I'd love to take more time to think on in other videos. Does anything deserve worship in the way that we actually conceptualize worship? Not in this highest value kind of worship. That's an amazingly interesting question. And my thoughts on it might not be as cut and dry as you would think. So let's take another video to dive into that. But for now, I'm stopping. Thanks for being here. I'll see you Tuesday with another takedown. And until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Ian, Boris, GVI, Jacob, Joe, Martin, Oliver, Perry, Rokkit, and Shawn, my Humanist heroes, Jarrod, James, and Kristi, my Atheist advocates, Caleb, Imposter, Jeff, Jeffrey, Karen, Paul, Sparky, and Todd, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel, or you just enjoy the content, please consider joining these fine people today.